people wanted to believe. And our crew started spinning this story. We just made it up as we went along. That, oh yeah, people would say, well, isn't the chemical burn gonna, destroy the playa? And be like, oh no, it's not a chemical propellant. It's a plasma propellant. Because this high voltage effect is a plasma effect. It's a high voltage plasma discharge. And people are like, oh, it's a plasma discharge, okay. And we'll be like, yeah. In fact, we've got giant electromagnets in the fins. And those are going to direct the plasma so we can control, our direction. People are like, oh, okay, wow. So people believe us. People, you laugh, but people who should know better. People would start asking me questions about it. And it was clear that they knew enough physics to know that that was not actually happening here. But people wanted to believe. And part of the reason why they were able to believe and able to let themselves into that belief was because of the reality of the ship, the detail that every member of the crew put into it, from everything from the exterior to the engine. And so we made up this story about this engine, and we said, oh yeah, we've got these collaborators, this professor of electrical engineering from New Zealand, which is true. And like every good story, there were all these grains of truth. And people believed it. And the night before the burn, right, we had this big fireworks effect, this big fireworks show. Was anyone there for it? Yeah. All right. Did you get to see it? Because it was a really dusty night. Yeah. The next day, even though it was just fireworks, we were telling people that it got off the ground. We weren't sure exactly how high it got off the ground. We were still checking our telemetry, but it got off the ground. And again, people wanted to believe. And to this day, we still get emails from people asking about the launch and whether we got off and all these kinds of things. So people really believed this story about this engine and this magnetically constricted plasma flow. And at group meetings every morning, before we would go out and let people onto this, we would kind of, as the story developed, right, as the Burning Man went on, every day the story got a little richer in detail, and more members of the crew got on board with it. We would stand around and be like, magnetically constricted plasma flow, and everybody would say it, and it was a lot of fun, and we created this, this little sculpture in this seed of this larger sculpture of the rocket, created this whole alternate science fictional world that sucked people in. And then we got home, and we took the rocket apart, and we took the engine apart, and we got a call from NASA. What was the Director of Operations at Houston?
The head of operations from Johnson Space Center. He's also the chairman of the board of the Space Center Houston, which is the visitor center.
Right. And he wanted to know about our rocket. So he came down to our headquarters in West Oakland, and we started telling him about the rocket, and I think he knew that it wasn't real. We started to tell him about the engine, and we showed him this, and we started telling him the story about the magnetically constricted plasma flow, and he looks at us and he goes, have you heard of Franklin Chang Diaz? And we hadn't, and it turns out that there's a NASA astronaut, former NASA astronaut, Franklin Chang Diaz. He's the astronaut he's tied for being in space the most. He's the first Costa Rican astronaut. He's self-taught, went to MIT, brilliant guy. He's developing a real-life plasma drive that is a magnetically constricted plasma flow that he wants to use to get us to Mars. Now, his uses a nuclear reactor. We don't. We use 3 neon sign transmitters. And eventually break it down. So what we do is we cover it up with another piece of this material. It's all held together with incredibly adhesive silicone, and so the side that's a little bit duller and not quite as bright is the side where there's the most overlap on the seam. Does anyone have any questions?
How high did the spaceship go when you turned it on?
Well, we're still checking our telemetry, but we think about 4 inches we got off. it was chained to the ground so that it couldn't go too far, because we didn't want to lose it, otherwise we couldn't get home.
Some people go a little higher than others.
So these tubes, usually they're made fresh for every show like this, but these are still the same ones that we ran at Sonoma County. I'm actually really impressed that they're still working. Because we ran them for about an hour at Sonoma County, and then they've been, you know, they've been kicked around the shop and, you know, transported here and there. So I'm actually fairly impressed with how stable they are.
Did they burn through eventually?
They burn through eventually, yeah. So that's where they'll fail. Is there we go, right there.
Wow.
So